some people believe that God is commanding them to hit their children. And indeed, there are lots of passages in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that say that. But then there's lots of passages elsewhere that say to do the opposite, and especially the New Testament. Moreover, it's a kind of selection from biblical injunctions about children that people who are in favor of corporal punishment make. It's a selective literal interpretation. For example, there's a section in Deuteronomy that says that if a child is disrespectful to parents, the child should be stoned to death. You don't find many people saying, well, we have to stone our disrespectful children to death just because it says so in the Bible.
The fundamentalist approach to corporal punishment, which argues that parents are on earth to bend the will of the demon child, to beat the devil out of the child, and who draw upon the Bible as their source for this benevolency towards their children, take a fairly selective reading of the Bible. Because if you read deeper into the New Testament, Jesus was a lot more compassionate towards children than the fundamentalist selective reading would argue. I'd have to say, having read the New Testament over and over again, because people keep sending it to me to challenge my beliefs, that the New Testament comes down more on the side of not using corporal punishment towards children than on the side of bending the will of a child. That really is a Puritan selective reading of the Bible that goes back to the 1620s and the Puritans in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But it isn't a truly literal interpretation of the Bible. And again, like with everybody else, it's pretty self-serving. What it tries to do is say what we do is okay, what the other people do is wrong. But it is self-perpetuating, because the more corporal punishment you use, the more dogmatic and narrow-focused an individual you raise, who will accept anything you hand to them and accept it without reason or logic. I mean, you can't have a debate on this issue with the fundamentalists because the matter is closed before the debate begins. It's not that fundamentalist groups are that powerful, it's that child advocates are so weak and so timid. Having worked in Washington and worked for a conservative Republican and worked with conservative Republicans on a number of bills and having to make a certain number of compromises on a number of bills, I was struck by how vocal and how active the conservative right is, and how just plain stupid the liberal left can be. They round up the same suspects, they send in the same advocates, they make arguments that aren't backed up with scientific evidence, they don't bother reading the scientific evidence, and they feed, and they're so afraid of the Christian coalition, which they have outnumbered 100 to 1, that they dissipate with any political muscle they might have had. I just don't buy it. I mean, having worked for certain pieces of legislation and worked very closely and very well with very conservative legislators, we agreed to disagree on certain issues for a higher goal of benefiting and protecting the best interest of children in this country. And I think that the fear is unwarranted, the fear is unreasonable, and if child advocates really want to protect children, they should stop just talking the talk and get out and do what the Christian right do and walk the walk.
I don't think there is any issue of American public policy related to children that is more likely to evoke among the proponents of corporal punishment, would be more likely to generate as much heat, as much anger, and if we're talking about the fundamentalists and the Christian right and those that have been trying to influence the political process would be more likely to raise as much money as any threat that parents would not be able to discipline their children. They are scared. They are scared that government will come in to the picture on this issue. They are very scared. But I firmly believe that this is one of their hot button. Abortion, making abortion legal is one of their hot button issues, and this is their kind of untapped hot button issue.
Well, one answer is we're the most punitive country of all the Western democracies. Now, the next question, well, why are we? Well, there's absolutely no question in my mind from the research I've done, from the scholarship I've done, the reading I've done of other people, that this policy of punitiveness is driven by the religious and political far right. Absolutely no question. It's driven by fundamentalist type of thinking, and it doesn't have to be Protestant fundamentalism, although we've done several studies of support for spanking, and we asked religious questions, which a lot of people have avoided. And the people who are self-described as the most punitive are literalists, fundamentalists who believe literally in the Bible, and Baptists. And as a religion, Protestantism, people who are Protestants describe themselves as more likely to use corporal punishment and more likely to be punitive with their children than are other groups. The Jews, who of course represent a very small minority, were the least likely to use punitive methods, and Catholics were in between. And we found this across other groups, by the way. We've done lots of studies of different groups. We found this to be true of teachers, of medical students, of psychologists, and so forth. So we found that this crucible of fundamentalist thinking, of Old Testament, of choosing from the Bible the most punitive parts of the Old Testament, going to Solomon for his wisdom, really has a very important role to play in the thinking of Americans and their support for corporal punishment. We also found, of course, tradition and geographic regions predict it, but they're all tied together. So what we've come to the conclusion that the reason we're the most punitive country in the world is that much of our social policy, especially since the Reagan years on, is driven by this fundamentalist, punitive thinking, which says the best way to solve problems is punishment. And this is one of the reasons why, again, the political and religious right has attacked child abuse laws, because they think that nobody has a right to go into the home of a person, even if you beat the child with a strap or do what they call biblical chastisement. The state does not have any right to go in there and tell a parent they can't do this. Okay, there are two basic views of childhood. One is that children are born into darkness, born into sin, that children are basically a bundle of impulses that have to be controlled. The other, and that's usually the fundamentalist Christian view of childhood, that they're born into sin, that they're liable to the influence of the devil, and therefore we got to beat the devil out of them. Now that's the extreme view, contemporary Christian view. It's the same view that was held for the last several thousand years.